A glamorous gala, 300 guests watching, and a mother-in-law throws red wine directly onto her pregnant daughter-in-law's face, calling her trash in front of everyone. She thought she was destroying a nobody. She had no idea she just assaulted the woman who secretly owns the entire company, including the building they were standing in. What happens next? Let's just say Eleanor Lawson's empire crumbles faster than that wine stain dried. This story has betrayal, revenge, and a twist so satisfying you will want to replay it twice. If you love karma catching up to toxic people, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you are listening from right now. Let's begin. In 3 hours, my mother-in-law would throw wine in my face in front of 300 people. She thought she was humiliating a nobody. She had no idea she was assaulting the woman who owned every building she had ever walked into, including the one hosting her precious gala tonight. Vivian Mercer stood before the floor-length mirror in her penthouse, her reflection staring back with an expression she barely recognized anymore. 7 months pregnant, wrapped in a cream Valentino gown that cost more than most people earned in a year. She looked every inch the society wife she had pretended to be for 3 long years. But the gown concealed more than her growing belly. It hid the weight of a secret that had become almost unbearable to carry. She touched the fabric gently, feeling the silk slide beneath her fingers. The dress was beautiful, elegant, perfect for the wife of Preston Lawson, heir to the Lawson Corporation fortune. Perfect for a woman who was supposed to be nothing more than a marketing consultant from a middle-class family in Ohio. The lie tasted bitter every time she swallowed it. 3 years ago, Vivian had been worth $2.3 billion. She had built Mercer Holdings from nothing, starting with a laptop in her college dorm room and growing it into one of the most powerful holding companies on the East Coast. By 30, she had acquired 17 companies. By 31, she had doubled her portfolio. And then she had met Preston Lawson at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. He had been standing in line behind her, complaining about the wait, when she turned around and told him that patience was a virtue worth practicing. He had laughed, surprised by her directness, and asked if he could buy her coffee as an apology for his rudeness. For the first time in years, someone looked at her without calculating her net worth. Someone saw her, not her bank account, not her company, not her reputation, just her. She fell in love with the man who brought her flowers from street vendors instead of Cartier. The man who took her to hole-in-the-wall restaurants instead of 5-star establishments. The man who seemed to love her simply because she made him laugh. When Preston proposed, Vivian made a choice that her board of directors thought was insane. She transferred her visible assets into blind trusts. She stepped back from public appearances. She let the world believe that Vivian Mercer had retired from business to pursue personal interests. She entered the Lawson family as nobody special. Just Vivian, the marketing consultant. Just the woman their precious Preston had chosen to marry. She wanted to know if they could love her for who she was, not what she had. The answer had been clear from the beginning. Eleanor Lawson had never hidden her disdain. Every family dinner came with cutting remarks about Vivian's background. Every holiday brought whispered insults about her breeding. Every public appearance included subtle humiliations designed to remind Vivian that she would never truly belong. And Preston, the man she had trusted with her heart, had stood by silently through all of it. A knock at the door pulled Vivian from her thoughts. Charlotte Webb entered without waiting for permission, her heels clicking against the marble floor with urgent purpose. Charlotte was the only person in the world who knew the truth. As chief operating officer of Mercer Holdings, she had been by Vivian's side since the beginning. More importantly, she was the closest thing to family Vivian had ever known. Tonight, Charlotte would be attending the gala as the event coordinator, a cover that allowed her to stay close without raising suspicion. Charlotte held up a tablet displaying financial documents. The acquisition is complete. As of 6 p.m. today, Mercer Holdings officially owns Lawson Corporation, $800 million, and they have no idea their own daughter-in-law just bought their company. Vivian took the tablet, scanning the numbers that confirmed what she had been planning for months. The irony was almost poetic. Eleanor had spent 3 years trying to push Vivian out of her family. Now Vivian owned everything the family had ever built. "You could end this tonight," Charlotte said softly. "One phone call, one revelation. Eleanor would be bowing at your feet before dessert." Vivian set the tablet down and turned back to the mirror. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her daughter kicked gently against her palm. "I need to know, Charlotte, If they cannot love me as nobody, they do not deserve to know me as somebody. My daughter will not grow up in a family that only values wealth and status. Charlotte sighed. Vivian, you have given them 3 years. How much more proof do you need before Vivian could answer? Her phone buzzed on the vanity. She picked it up and read the message, her jaw tightening with each word. The text was from Eleanor. Try not to embarrass us tonight. Some of us have reputations to protect. Vivian stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had finally reached the end of her patience. She has no idea how prophetic that statement is about to become, Vivian said quietly. Charlotte moved closer, concern evident in her expression. What are you planning? Vivian set down the phone and turned to face her friend. Tonight, I am going to give Eleanor exactly what she wants. I am going to let her show the world who she really is. And then I am going to show the world who I really am. She picked up her clutch and walked toward the door, her movement steady and deliberate. Charlotte called after her. Vivian, whatever happens tonight, remember that you have already won. You do not have to prove anything to anyone. Vivian paused at the threshold. I know, but my daughter deserves to know that her mother did not hide from bullies. She deserves to know that her mother stood up and fought back. She stepped into the hallway, her heels echoing against the marble like a countdown to something inevitable. Tonight, everything would change. Tonight, the truth would finally be revealed. And Eleanor Lawson had no idea what was coming. The Sterling Hotel ballroom glittered with the kind of opulence that only old money could appreciate. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting prismatic light across 400 guests dressed in their finest attire. A live orchestra played softly near the stage, their music weaving through conversations about stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. Vivian stepped through the entrance and felt the familiar weight of scrutiny settle onto her shoulders. Eyes turned in her direction. Whispers followed like shadows. There she is, Preston's wife, the one Eleanor cannot stand. Did you see her dress trying too hard? If you ask me, poor thing, she has no idea what she married into. Vivian kept her expression serene, her posture perfect. 3 years of practice had taught her how to move through hostile territory without showing weakness. She scanned the room for Preston, who had promised to escort her inside but had sent a text 20 minutes ago saying he would meet her there. The first red flag of the evening. She found him near the bar, his back turned to the entrance. He was not alone. A woman stood beside him, tall and blonde, her hand resting on his arm with an intimacy that made Vivian's stomach tighten. Genevieve Ashford, Preston's college girlfriend, the woman Eleanor had always wanted him to marry. Vivian watched as Preston leaned closer to whisper something that made Genevieve laugh. Neither of them looked toward the entrance. Neither of them seemed to care that Vivian was standing 30 feet away, watching her husband flirt with another woman. She took a breath and reminded herself why she was here. Not for Preston, not for Eleanor, for the truth. Charlotte's voice crackled through the tiny earpiece hidden beneath Vivian's hair. I have eyes on you. Eleanor is holding court near the stage. She has been watching the entrance for the past 10 minutes. Vivian adjusted her clutch and began walking deeper into the ballroom. Thank you. Keep monitoring communications. Before she could reach Preston, a voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife through silk. Well, you actually came. Eleanor Lawson emerged from a cluster of admirers, her emerald gown catching the light with every deliberate step. At 61, she remained striking, her silver hair styled in an elegant updo, her jewelry worth more than most houses. But it was her eyes that commanded attention. Cold, calculating, and fixed on Vivian with unmistakable contempt. Eleanor stopped directly in front of her daughter-in-law, close enough that her perfume invaded Vivian's space. I told Preston that a woman in your condition should stay home and rest, Eleanor said, her voice pitched to carry to nearby guests. But I suppose you could not resist the opportunity to parade yourself in public. Several people nearby fell silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they turned to watch. Vivian smiled politely. Your concern for my health is touching. Eleanor, almost as touching as your concern for your company's stock price. I hear it has been volatile lately. Eleanor's eye twitched. The comment had landed, even if the older woman did not fully understand its implications. I do not know what you think you know about business, dear. But perhaps you should leave such matters to people who actually understand them. Eleanor replied, her tone dripping with condescension. A waiter passed with champagne. Eleanor took a glass without looking at him, as if his existence barely registered. Tell me, Vivian, have you thought about what happens after the baby is born? Preston will be quite busy with the new merger. He will need a wife who can support his career, not one who drags him down with her pedestrian background. The word stung, but Vivian had heard worse. She had spent 3 years absorbing Eleanor's cruelty, cataloging every insult, every slight, every public humiliation. Tonight, the catalog would be closed. I am sure Preston appreciates your guidance, Vivian said carefully, though I wonder if he appreciates it as much as Genevieve does. Eleanor's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. Then it hardened into something colder. Genevieve is an old family friend. Unlike some people, she understands her place in this world. Before Vivian could respond, Charlotte's voice came through the earpiece again. Urgent this time. Vivian, I need you to stay calm. I just intercepted an email from Eleanor's assistant. She is planning something tonight, something public. I am still decrypting the details, but you need to be careful. Vivian's heart rate increased, but her expression remained unchanged. She had learned long ago that showing fear to predators only made them attack harder. If you will excuse me, Eleanor, I should find my husband. She moved past her mother-in-law, feeling those cold eyes following her across the ballroom. Preston finally noticed her approaching. He straightened, adjusting his jacket, and stepped away from Genevieve with the guilty quickness of a man caught doing something wrong. Vivian, there you are. He kissed her cheek perfunctorily, his lips barely grazing her skin. You look nice. Nice after 3 years of marriage. That was the best he could offer. Thank you for waiting for me at the entrance, she said, her voice neutral. Preston had the grace to look uncomfortable. I got caught up talking to some investors. You know how it is. Genevieve smiled, her red lips curving with predatory sweetness. Vivian, how lovely to see you. Pregnancy suits you, though I imagine the 3rd trimester must be exhausting. I manage, Vivian replied. Across the room, Eleanor had taken her position near the stage, where the board chairman was preparing to make the evening's big announcement. She caught Vivian's eye and raised her champagne glass in a mock toast. Vivian felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Whatever was coming, it was coming soon. The orchestra shifted to a softer melody as the board chairman took the stage. Richard Sullivan was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the practiced poise of someone who had spent decades navigating corporate politics. Tonight, he would announce the merger that the Lawson family believed would cement their legacy for another generation. He had no idea that the real owner of Lawson Corporation was standing in the audience, wearing wine-stained silk and carrying a secret that would destroy everything Eleanor had built. But that revelation was still an hour away. First, Vivian would have to survive what was coming. Eleanor moved through the crowd with predatory grace, a fresh glass of red wine in her hand. The liquid caught the chandelier light, glowing like dark blood. She stopped near the stage, positioning herself where every camera in the room could capture whatever happened next. Charlotte's voice came through the earpiece, tense and urgent. Vivian, I decoded the email. Eleanor is planning to publicly accuse you of infidelity. She has fabricated evidence, photos, messages, all fake. She is going to claim the baby is not Preston's. Vivian's blood ran cold. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her daughter kicked as if sensing her mother's distress. She looked across the room at Eleanor, who was watching her with barely concealed anticipation. The older woman raised her wine glass slightly, a silent promise of what was to come. Vivian understood then that she had underestimated her enemy. She had thought Eleanor would be satisfied with petty cruelty, with whispered insults and subtle humiliations. She had not anticipated that her mother-in-law would try to destroy her completely. She had to decide. She could reveal herself now, before Eleanor's attack, and take away the power of the accusation, or she could wait, let Eleanor expose herself as the monster she truly was, and then deliver the killing blow. Charlotte, Vivian whispered, has the acquisition been officially announced to the board? Not yet. The announcement is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Do you want me to move it up? No. Vivian's voice was steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. Let her make her move. I want everyone to see exactly who Eleanor Lawson really is. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure once she attacks, there is no taking it back? I am sure. Record everything. Eleanor was moving again, cutting through the crowd toward Vivian with the focused intent of a predator closing in on wounded prey. Several guests noticed and turned to watch, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Preston appeared at Vivian's side, his expression tight. My mother wants to speak with you, I noticed. Vivian replied. She walked toward Eleanor, meeting her in the center of the ballroom where the chandeliers cast the brightest light. If this was going to be a public execution, she would face it, standing tall. Eleanor stopped 2 feet away, close enough that Vivian could smell the expensive wine on her breath. I have been patient with you, Eleanor said, her voice carrying to the nearest guests. I have watched you play your games for 3 years, but tonight was the game's end. I was not aware we were playing games, Vivian replied calmly. Eleanor's lip curled. Drop the innocent act. I know what you are. A gold digger, a liar, and now a whore who cannot even keep her legs closed for other men while carrying my son's supposed child. Gasps erupted from the surrounding guests. Camera phones appeared. The orchestra stopped playing. Vivian felt the accusation land like a physical blow, her cheeks flushed with humiliation, even though she knew the charge was completely fabricated. That is a lie, she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to control it. Is it? Eleanor reached into her clutch and pulled out a photograph, holding it up for everyone to see. Then explain this. The photo showed Vivian entering a hotel, a man's hand on her lower back. The angle was carefully chosen to suggest intimacy. What it did not show was that the man was Charlotte's brother, who had been helping Vivian with security arrangements for this very evening. But the damage was done. The crowd murmured. Phones clicked. Doubt spread across faces like a virus. Preston stepped forward, his expression dark. Vivian, what is this? It is nothing. The man in that photo is a business associate. Your mother is lying. Eleanor laughed, sharp and cruel. A business associate, is that what we are calling it now? She took another step closer, the wine glass still clutched in her hand. Let me make something perfectly clear. Eleanor continued, her voice rising for the benefit of the audience. You are not fit to carry the Lawson name. You are not fit to raise a Lawson child. And after tonight, everyone will know exactly what kind of woman you truly are. Before Vivian could respond, Eleanor lifted her glass and threw the contents directly at her face. The wine hit her like a slap, splashing across her eyes, dripping down her cheeks, soaking into the cream fabric of her gown. The red liquid spread across her belly in a grotesque stain that looked almost like blood. The ballroom fell completely silent. Vivian stood frozen, wine dripping from her chin, her vision blurred, her dignity shattered in front of 300 witnesses. For one terrible moment, she felt herself breaking, felt the tears threatening to spill, felt every ounce of strength she had built over 32 years crumbling into dust. Eleanor smiled. This is what happens when gutter trash tries to rise above her station. Vivian could feel the wine soaking through her dress, cold against her skin, the smell of fermented grapes mixing with the expensive perfume she had applied only hours ago. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her vision blurred, partly from the wine that had splashed near her eyes, partly from tears she refused to let fall. 300 people watched her. 300 phones recorded her humiliation. 300 voices whispered and judged and condemned. And in the center of it all, Eleanor stood triumphant, her empty glass still clutched in her perfectly manicured hand. Preston moved forward, but not toward his wife. He moved toward his mother, positioning himself between Eleanor and the crowd as if to shield her from consequences. Mother, what did she say to you? His voice carried across the silent ballroom. Vivian, what did you do? The accusation hit harder than the wine. Her own husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, was blaming her for her own assault. I did nothing, Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper. She threw wine on me, Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, producing tears that Vivian knew were completely fabricated. She threatened me. She said terrible things about our family. I was merely defending myself. Liar. Vivian wanted to scream, but her throat had closed around the word, trapping it behind the shock and humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her. Charlotte's voice came through the earpiece, urgent and strained. Vivian, stay calm. I have multiple angles of what just happened. The cameras caught everything. She cannot escape this. But the cameras also caught Vivian standing there, dripping and defeated, while Eleanor played the victim to perfection. In the court of public opinion, truth often lost to performance. Richard Sullivan stepped forward from his position near the stage, his expression troubled. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. Allow everyone to collect themselves. That will not be necessary. Eleanor interrupted smoothly. The evening must continue. We have important business to conduct. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying with practiced authority. I apologize for the disruption. As you can see, my daughter-in-law has been under considerable stress lately. The pregnancy has affected her judgment. We have arranged for her to receive care at a facility that specializes in these situations. Vivian's blood turned to ice. Two men in white coats appeared at the ballroom entrance, their presence sending a ripple of shock through the crowd. They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before, their eyes fixed on Vivian with professional detachment. She is trying to have you committed, Charlotte said in her ear. Vivian, you need to reveal yourself now. But Vivian could not move. The shock had rooted her to the floor, frozen her voice, paralyzed every instinct except the primal urge to run. Eleanor approached again, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Vivian could hear. Did you really think I would let you steal my family? Did you really think I would let some nobody from Ohio raise a Lawson grandchild? You are nothing. You have nothing, and by tomorrow, you will not even exist. She stepped back and addressed Preston, her voice returning to its public register. Darling, please escort your wife to the doctors. It is for her own good, for the baby's good. Preston reached for Vivian's arm, his grip firm, his expression cold. Do not make a scene, he said quietly. Just come with me. We can sort this out later. You knew. Vivian breathed, realization crashing over her like a wave. You knew she was going to do this. Preston's jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. Charlotte's voice came again, more urgent now. Vivian, I intercepted more documents. Preston has been funneling company secrets to a competitor. Eleanor has been negotiating to sell Lawson Corporation to a hostile buyer. The merger celebration tonight is a smokescreen. They have been planning to cut you out for months. The information hit Vivian in waves, each revelation more devastating than the last. Her husband was not just complicit in her humiliation. He was actively working to destroy her. One of the doctors approached, his manner gentle but firm. Ma'am, please come with us. We do not want to make this more difficult than necessary. Vivian looked at the faces around her. Some watched with pity, others with morbid curiosity. A few, she noticed, looked genuinely concerned. But none of them stepped forward. None of them intervened. She was alone. For a moment, just one terrible moment. She considered surrendering, letting them take her away, letting them win. Then she felt her daughter kick against her palm, strong and insistent, a reminder of everything she was fighting for. No. The word came out stronger than she expected, cutting through the heavy silence. The doctor paused. Excuse me, Vivian straightened her spine, lifting her chin despite the wine still dripping down her face. I said no. I am not going anywhere with you. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You do not have a choice. Dear, Vivian looked at her mother-in-law, and for the first time in 3 years, she stopped hiding. Actually, she said quietly, I have more choices than you could possibly imagine. She reached into her clutch and pressed a button on her phone. Every screen in the ballroom flickered. The ballroom screens flickered, but nothing happened. Eleanor laughed, a sharp, triumphant sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Whatever you think you are doing, it will not work, she said. I control the technology in this building. I control everything. Charlotte's voice came through the earpiece, strained with frustration. They blocked our signal. They must have prepared for this. I am working on a bypass, but I need time. Vivian felt the first real crack in her composure. She had planned for confrontation, for revelation, for victory. She had not planned for her carefully constructed countermeasures to fail. Preston tightened his grip on her arm. Enough games. Vivian, come with us now, or this gets much worse. The men in white coats moved closer. The crowd watched with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Ma'am, the lead doctor said, his tone still artificially calm. If you do not come voluntarily, we are authorized to use restraints. For your safety and the safety of your unborn child, You cannot do this, Vivian said, her voice rising. This is kidnapping. Eleanor stepped forward, producing a document from her clutch. Actually, we can. This is a court order for emergency psychiatric evaluation, signed by a judge this afternoon. It states that you have been exhibiting signs of severe prenatal psychosis and pose a danger to yourself and others. Vivian grabbed the document, her eyes scanning the legal language. The signature at the bottom made her stomach drop. Judge Richard Blackwell, one of the most respected names in the New York judicial system. How did you get this? Eleanor smiled. I have friends everywhere, dear. Friends you could never hope to match. The doctor reached for Vivian's arm. She pulled back instinctively, but Preston held her in place. Charlotte, Vivian whispered urgently. I need that bypass now. 60 seconds. Just hold on. But 60 seconds felt like an eternity when two men were preparing to drag her away in front of 300 witnesses. Vivian did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. The sound tore through the ballroom, raw and desperate and undeniably human. It was not a scream of hysteria. It was a scream of a woman fighting for her life and her child. Someone help me. They are trying to kidnap me. The crowd shifted. Several people stepped forward, their expressions uncertain. A woman near the front said loudly, This does not feel right. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. She is having an episode. This is exactly what I was warning you about. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. People were looking at the situation with new eyes, seeing not a concerned family dealing with a mentally ill member, but something darker, more sinister. One of the board members, an older man with kind eyes, stepped forward. Perhaps we should wait for the authorities to verify the legitimacy of these documents. The documents are legitimate, Eleanor snapped. She needs immediate care. Then she will not mind waiting for verification. The board member replied firmly. For a moment, Vivian felt hope kindle in her chest. Someone was defending her. Someone was questioning Eleanor's narrative. Then Preston pulled out his phone and showed it to the board member. Call the judge yourself. Preston said, Judge Blackwell will confirm everything. The board member took the phone, dialing while the room held its breath. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Finally, the board member lowered the phone, his expression troubled. The judge confirms he signed the order this afternoon. He states that multiple psychiatric evaluations were submitted showing concerning behavior patterns. The hope in Vivian's chest died. Eleanor's smile returned, colder than ever. Satisfied now. Can we please handle this with some dignity? The doctors moved in again. This time, Vivian had nowhere to retreat. Charlotte, she whispered desperately. The response came too late. I am sorry, Vivian. They anticipated our countermeasures. I am locked out of everything. Vivian felt the doctor's hand close around her wrist. She felt Preston's grip tighten on her other arm. She felt her freedom slipping away like water through clenched fingers. Then Eleanor leaned close, her whisper dripping with venom. By the way, your personal accounts have been frozen. Your credit cards have been canceled. Every asset you thought you had has been seized by court order. When you wake up tomorrow, you will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee. The financial attack was the final blow. Vivian had kept some funds separate from Mercer Holdings, personal accounts that she used for daily expenses, accounts that should have been protected by privacy laws. But Eleanor had found a way through. Preston smiled at her, and in that smile, she saw the monster she had married. Did you really think I loved you? His voice was soft enough that only she could hear. You were always a placeholder. Vivian, a womb to carry the Lawson heir. Once the baby is born, you are disposable. The words cut deeper than any knife. And our daughter, Vivian asked, her voice breaking. Preston's smile widened. My daughter, I have already filed emergency custody papers based on your mental instability and financial insolvency. I will have full custody the moment she is born. You might get supervised visitation if you behave. Vivian stared at the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, the man she had given up everything to be with. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt something embedded her shatter completely. The ballroom had become a prison. 300 faces watched Vivian's destruction with varying degrees of pity, satisfaction, and morbid curiosity. The doctors flanked her like guards. Preston gripped her arm with possessive cruelty. Eleanor stood before her, triumphant and terrible, and Vivian, wine-stained and betrayed, felt the last pieces of her carefully constructed life crumbling into dust. She thought about giving up. She thought about letting them take her away, letting them win, letting the world believe whatever story Eleanor chose to tell. But then she felt her daughter kick, hard and insistent, as if to say, fight, fight for me. Vivian closed her eyes. She took a breath, and when she opened them again, something had changed. Charlotte, she said, her voice steady and clear. Execute Protocol Omega. There was a pause on the other end of the earpiece. Then Charlotte's response came, filled with barely contained fury. About time, give me 30 seconds. Eleanor noticed the shift in Vivian's demeanor. She stepped closer, suspicious. What are you doing? Vivian looked at her mother-in-law with an expression Eleanor had never seen before. It was not fear. It was not submission. It was the calm, guarded confidence of a woman who had been holding back for far too long. I am done playing by your rules, Eleanor. The lights in the ballroom flickered. Then they went out completely. Screams erupted from the crowd. People stumbled in the sudden darkness, knocking over champagne glasses, bumping into chairs. The case lasted only 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When the lights came back on, every screen in the ballroom displayed a single image, the Mercer Holdings corporate structure, with one name highlighted at the very top, Vivian Mercer, founder and majority shareholder. Eleanor stared at the screen, her face draining of color. What is this? She whispered. Vivian pulled her arm free from Preston's suddenly slack grip. She stepped forward, standing tall despite the wine-stained dress and the humiliation she had just endured. Allow me to introduce myself properly, she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. My name is Vivian Mercer, not Vivian Lawson. I never legally took your son's name. She paused, letting the words sink in. I am the founder and sole owner of Mercer Holdings, a company worth $4.2 billion. As of 6 p.m. today, Mercer Holdings completed its acquisition of Lawson Corporation for $800 million. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Eleanor staggered backward as if physically struck. That is impossible, she said. We would have known. Would you? Vivian asked calmly. You spent 3 years dismissing me as a nobody, a gold digger, trash that did not belong in your precious family. Not once did you consider that I might be more than what I appeared. Not once did you ask yourself why a woman with no apparent resources would marry into your family without a prenuptial agreement. Charlotte appeared through a side door, flanked by 2 security guards wearing Mercer Holdings identification badges. She carried a tablet loaded with evidence that would bury the Lawson family forever. The hostile takeover you have been planning, Vivian continued, is irrelevant. You cannot sell a company you no longer own. The board members you bribed are being arrested as we speak. And Judge Blackwell? She smiled coldly. He has been under federal investigation for corruption for 6 months. Whatever documents he signed today will be worthless by morning. Eleanor looked around desperately, searching for allies, finding none. Preston, she said urgently, do something. But Preston was staring at Vivian as if seeing her for the first time. His face had gone pale, his arrogance replaced by dawning horror. You planned this, he said. I planned everything, Vivian replied. Every moment of the last 3 years, every insult I absorbed, every humiliation I endured, I documented all of it, waiting for you to show me who you really were. She took another step forward, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Tonight, you showed me, both of you. Charlotte stepped up beside her, projecting new evidence onto the screens. Security footage of Eleanor throwing the wine, audio recordings of Preston admitting the marriage was a scam, financial documents showing years of embezzlement from Lawson Corporation. This woman, Vivian said, pointing at Eleanor, assaulted me in front of 300 witnesses. This man, she pointed at Preston, admitted to marrying me under false pretenses and planning to steal custody of my child. Both of them have committed multiple federal crimes. The crowd watched in stunned silence as everything they thought they knew collapsed around them. Eleanor made one last desperate attempt. These are lies, fabrications. You cannot prove any of this. Actually, Charlotte said calmly, we can prove all of it, and we have already shared the evidence with federal prosecutors. As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened. Detective Morrison entered with 4 uniformed officers, their badges gleaming under the chandelier lights. Eleanor Lawson, Preston Lawson, the detective said. You are being detained pending criminal charges. Please come with us, Eleanor screamed as the officers approached. You cannot do this to me. I am Eleanor Lawson. I built this family. Vivian watched as her mother-in-law was led away in handcuffs, her designer gown wrinkled, her perfect hair falling loose, her facade crumbling with every step. Preston tried to approach Vivian one last time. Vivian, please. We can work this out. I love you. I was confused. My mother pressured me. Vivian looked at him with something that might have been pity. Save it for your lawyer, Preston. And for the record, I am filing for divorce and full custody of our daughter. Your forged prenuptial agreement, I have had the original since the day you created it. She leaned closer, her voice dropping so only he could hear. You wanted a womb to carry your heir. Congratulations. Your heir will know exactly what kind of man her father is, and she will watch him rot in prison. The officers led Preston away, his protests echoing through the ballroom until the doors closed behind him, and Vivian finally allowed herself to breathe. The ballroom transformed in the wake of Eleanor and Preston's arrest. The atmosphere shifted from shocked silence to something more complex, a mixture of vindication, shame, and dawning awareness that rippled through the crowd like waves across still water. Vivian stood in the center of it all, wine-stained and exhausted, but standing, always standing. Charlotte moved to her side, pressing a clean towel into her hands. The security team is sweeping the building. We have identified 2 additional board members who were involved in the conspiracy. They are being detained separately. Vivian wiped her face, the towel coming away stained red. How many people knew more than we thought? Charlotte's voice was tight with anger, but most of them were just following orders. Eleanor had dirt on almost everyone in this room. The crowd had begun to move, people clustering in small groups, their conversations a mixture of disbelief and outrage. A few of the braver souls approached Vivian directly. The first was Margaret Foster, a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. She was a woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Ms. Mercer, she said formally, I want to apologize on behalf of everyone in this room who should have intervened and did not. What Eleanor did was inexcusable, and our silence made us complicit. Vivian studied her for a moment. You were afraid of her? Everyone was afraid of her? Margaret's voice carried no defensiveness, only truth. Eleanor Lawson had the power to destroy careers, ruin reputations, and eliminate anyone who crossed her. Most of us learned early to look the other way. And well, Margaret said, she is finished. And some of us are wondering if we should have found our courage sooner. More people approached. Some offered condolences. Others offered business cards. A few simply shook Vivian's hand and walked away without speaking, their expressions carrying more meaning than words could convey. One woman pushed through the crowd, her face wet with tears. She was younger than the others, perhaps 30, wearing a dress that was elegant but clearly not custom-made. I am so sorry, the woman said, her voice breaking. I should have said something. When she threw the wine, I should have stepped forward, but I was scared, and I just stood there, and I am so ashamed. Vivian recognized her. She had been standing near the front when Eleanor attacked, one of the few faces that had looked genuinely horrified rather than entertained. What is your name? Vivian asked gently. Rebecca. Rebecca Davis. I work in the marketing department. Or I did. Before tonight. Vivian touched her shoulder. You have nothing to apologize for. Eleanor terrorized this company for decades. Fear is a natural response to sustained abuse. But you faced her, Rebecca said. Even when she had all the power, you faced her. I had nothing left to lose. Vivian replied, sometimes that is what courage looks like. Charlotte cleared her throat. The press is outside. They want a statement. Vivian looked toward the ballroom doors, where she could hear the muffled chaos of reporters shouting questions. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still covered in wine stains. Every instinct told her to retreat, to hide, to let Charlotte handle the public relations nightmare that was about to unfold. But she thought about Rebecca's words. She thought about all the women who had been silenced by people like Eleanor, who had been dismissed and degraded and told they did not matter. Those women needed to see someone stand up. Those women needed to know that bullies did not always win. Open the doors, Vivian said. The press surged forward the moment the doors opened. Cameras flashing, microphones extended, voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions. Ms. Mercer, is it true you secretly owned Lawson Corporation? Why did you hide your identity for 3 years? Are you pressing charges against your mother-in-law? What about your husband? Do you have a statement about his arrest? Vivian raised her hand, and slowly the noise subsided. I will make a brief statement, and then I will take 3 questions. She looked directly into the nearest camera, speaking clearly and deliberately. Tonight, I was publicly assaulted by my mother-in-law in front of 300 witnesses. She believed she was humiliating a powerless woman. She was wrong. She paused, letting the words sink in. I did not reveal my identity for revenge. I revealed it because every woman who has been told she is not enough deserves to know that her worth is not determined by other people's approval. Eleanor Lawson tried to destroy me because she believed power came from pedigree. I built my power from nothing but hard work and determination. The cameras captured every word, broadcasting them to millions. My daughter will know that legacy is not inherited, it is built. She will know that her mother did not hide from bullies. She will know that the truth always emerges, no matter how powerful the people trying to suppress it. She pointed to a reporter near the front. First question, will you continue operating Lawson Corporation under Mercer Holdings? Yes. 2,000 employees depend on this company for their livelihoods. They did nothing wrong. They will be protected. She pointed to another reporter. What charges do you expect will be filed against Eleanor and Preston Lawson? That is for the prosecutors to decide. But based on the evidence we have compiled, I expect charges including assault, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. The reporter's eyes widened at the last charge. Vivian did not elaborate. Last question. A woman near the back raised her hand. What message do you want to send to women who are in similar situations? Vivian thought about the question carefully before answering. Document everything. Trust your instincts, and know that you are not alone. No one deserves to be abused, humiliated, or dismissed, regardless of their wealth or status. If you are in danger, reach out for help. And if you are in a position to help someone else, use your power for good. She stepped back from the microphones. That is all for tonight. Further statements will come through official channels. Charlotte guided her away from the press, toward a private elevator that would take them to a secure floor. As the doors closed, Vivian leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. It is really over, she whispered. Charlotte squeezed her hand. The hard part is, she said gently, the healing is just beginning. The penthouse suite on the Sterling Hotel's top floor had been reserved for VIP guests attending the gala. Now it served as Vivian's sanctuary, a quiet space where she could finally process everything that had happened. Charlotte helped her inside and closed the door against the chaos still unfolding floors below. The suite was elegant but impersonal, decorated in shades of cream and gold that felt almost mocking, given the wine stains still marking Vivian's dress. You should change, Charlotte said gently. I had a bag brought up with fresh clothes. Vivian shook her head. Not yet. I need a minute. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Manhattan spread before her like a glittering circuit board, millions of lives playing out in the buildings below. Most of them completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded in this hotel. Her hand moved to her belly, where her daughter had finally settled into stillness. I almost gave up, Vivian said quietly. When Preston said those things about the baby, when Eleanor tried to have me committed, for a moment I thought I had lost everything. Charlotte moved to stand beside her. But you did not give up. You planned for this. Every move, every contingency, planning and surviving are different things. Vivian's voice caught. I never wanted my daughter's first story to be this. I wanted her to know her father loved her. I wanted her to have the kind of family I never had. The admission hung in the air, heavy with grief. Charlotte said nothing, simply placing a supportive hand on Vivian's shoulder. Vivian had not spoken much about her own childhood. Her mother had died when she was 12. Her father had been a good man, but distant, consumed by work and grief. She had built her empire partly to fill the void, to create something lasting, something that would mean she mattered. She had wanted so badly to believe that Preston's love was real. Your daughter will have something better than Preston's love, Charlotte said finally. She will have yours. She will know her mother was brave enough to demand the truth. She will know her mother protected her when no one else would. Vivian turned away from the window, wiping at her eyes. "Tell me what happens next," she said. Charlotte pulled up her tablet, switching to business mode with the efficiency that had made her invaluable. "Eleanor and Preston are being processed at the Federal Detention Center. Based on the evidence we provided, the prosecutor is confident about multiple charges: assault, fraud, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and financial crimes." "What about Judge Blackwell? He was arrested an hour ago. The FBI has been building a case against him for months. Your situation gave them the final evidence they needed." Vivian felt a grim satisfaction at that. At least something good had come from this nightmare. "The acquisition is proceeding as planned," Charlotte continued. "The Lawson Corporation Board will meet tomorrow to formally approve the transition. Most of them are eager to distance themselves from Eleanor's shadow, and the employees protected. We have already issued a statement guaranteeing that no layoffs will result from the merger. Several of them have reached out, expressing gratitude." A knock at the door interrupted them. Charlotte answered it, accepting a package from a hotel staff member. She brought it to Vivian with a curious expression. "This was left at the concierge desk for you." Vivian opened the package to find a baby blanket, soft white cashmere, clearly expensive. A card was tucked inside. "For the little one. May she inherit her mother's strength, not her father's weakness. From the staff of the Sterling Hotel, who are proud to work for you." Vivian stared at the blanket, her vision blurring with fresh tears. But these were different from the tears she had shed earlier. These were not born of pain or humiliation. "They did not even know," she whispered. "All these years, they had no idea who owned this hotel, and yet they saw you." Charlotte said, "They saw how Eleanor treated you. They chose to be kind anyway." Vivian pressed the blanket to her chest, feeling its softness against her skin. "I spent 3 years pretending to be less than I am, hoping they would love me anyway. I was so afraid that my success made me unlovable. And now I know the truth. The right people love you for who you are. The wrong people want you to be smaller so they can feel bigger. I am done being small." Charlotte smiled, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself all evening. "That is the Vivian Mercer I know." Vivian looked down at the blanket in her hands, thinking about the child who would soon wrap herself in its warmth. Her daughter would never have to pretend to be less than she was. Her daughter would know from her first breath that she was loved, valued, and worthy, not because of her family name or her inheritance, but because of who she was. That was the legacy Vivian would build, not corporate empires or financial portfolios. A child who knew she was enough. Vivian woke to pale morning light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a disorienting moment, she did not remember where she was. Then the memories came flooding back: the gala, the wine, the revelation, the arrests. Everything. She sat up slowly, her muscles protesting after a night of fitful sleep. The penthouse suite looked different in daylight. Less imposing, more ordinary. The cream and gold decorations that had seemed mocking last night now simply looked tired. Charlotte was already awake, seated at a small desk with her laptop open and multiple phones within reach. She looked up when Vivian stirred. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Like I survived a war," Vivian replied honestly. "What did I miss?" Charlotte turned her laptop to show the screen. Every major news outlet had the story. Billionaire heiress reveals identity after mother-in-law's assault. Lawson family empire crumbles, following fraud revelations. The woman they called nobody owned everything. The headlines blurred together as Vivian scrolled through them. The video of Eleanor throwing wine had been viewed over 12 million times. Her statement to the press had been shared across every social media platform. The story was everywhere. Public response is overwhelming. Charlotte said, "Your inbox has over 10,000 messages. Most of them are supportive. Women sharing their own stories of being dismissed or underestimated." Vivian stopped scrolling on a comment that caught her attention. "I was in an abusive marriage for 15 years. I stayed because I thought I had no power. Watching this woman stand up for herself made me realize I have more power than I thought. I filed for divorce this morning." She stared at the words for a long moment. "I did not expect this," she said quietly. "People needed to see someone fight back." Charlotte replied, "You gave them permission to do the same." A knock at the door announced the arrival of breakfast. As the server arranged the meal on the suite's dining table, Vivian noticed him sneaking glances at her. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The server, a young man in his 20s, flushed slightly. I just wanted to say, he stammered, what you did last night was amazing. My mom worked here for 20 years before she retired. She always said the Lawsons treated staff like they were invisible. You actually look at us when you talk. You say thank you. That means something. Vivian felt her chest tighten. Thank you for telling me that. After he left, she sat down at the table but found she had no appetite. The weight of everything was still pressing down on her. Even as the immediate danger had passed, Charlotte joined her, pushing a cup of tea across the table. There is more news, she said carefully. Eleanor's bail hearing was this morning. She was denied due to flight risk. Vivian absorbed the information without emotion, and Preston, same result. He also has an outstanding warrant from Florida. Apparently, his first wife filed charges when she found out about your marriage. First wife. The words still felt surreal. Vivian had married a man who was already married, had built a life with someone who saw her as nothing more than a convenient means to an end. What happens to the baby now, she asked. Charlotte's expression softened. That is up to you. Your legal team has already filed for full custody. Given Preston's criminal charges and the evidence of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, no judge will grant him any form of custody or visitation. But he is still her father, biologically. Charlotte's tone was gentle but firm. Being a father requires more than genetics. Preston failed every test of fatherhood before his daughter was even born. Vivian placed her hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movements of the life growing inside her. I do not want her to grow up hating him, she said. I do not want her to carry that burden. She will know the truth. Charlotte said, you can share it with her in a way that is honest but not bitter. Let her form her own opinions when she is old enough to understand. Vivian nodded slowly. Her phone buzzed with a notification. The Lawson Corporation board had released a statement officially welcoming the Mercer Holdings acquisition and condemning Eleanor and Preston's actions as contrary to company values. She read it twice, marveling at how quickly loyalties shifted when power changed hands. Did any of them know, she asked, about what Eleanor was planning? Some suspected. None had the courage to act. Charlotte's voice carried no judgment, only observation. Fear is a powerful motivator. And now they are eager to prove their loyalty to you. Whether that loyalty is genuine remains to be seen. Vivian set down the phone and looked out the window at the city awakening below. I want to meet with the employees, she said, not the board, the people who actually keep the company running. I want them to know their jobs are safe and their voices matter. Charlotte smiled. I will arrange it, and I want to establish a fund for women leaving abusive situations, legal fees, housing assistance, job training, whatever they need to rebuild their lives. Done. Vivian turned back to her untouched breakfast. For the first time since the gala, she felt something other than exhaustion or grief. She felt purpose. The war was over. Now came the work of building something better. 2 months later, Vivian sat in a private hospital room, cradling her newborn daughter in her arms. The baby was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and her mother's determined expression even in sleep. She had arrived 3 weeks early, impatient to meet the world, just like Vivian had been all those years ago. Charlotte sat in the chair beside the bed, looking more exhausted than Vivian felt. She is beautiful, Charlotte said softly. Have you decided on a name? Vivian looked down at her daughter, at the tiny face that represented everything she had fought for. Eleanor, she said. Charlotte's eyes widened. You cannot be serious. After everything that woman put you through, Vivian smiled, stroking her daughter's cheek with one gentle finger. I am reclaiming the name. My daughter will be Eleanor Mercer, not Lawson. And when she grows up, she will know that her name used to belong to a woman who tried to destroy us. She will know that we took it back and made it mean something better. Charlotte was silent for a moment, processing this. Then slowly she smiled. Only you would turn your greatest enemy's name into a symbol of victory. It is not about victory, Vivian replied. It is about refusing to let fear define us. That name scared me for 3 years. I will not let it scare my daughter for even one day. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered with a gentle smile. You have visitors. If you are up for it, they say they are from the hotel staff. Vivian felt her heart swell. Send them in. A small group filed into the room. Rebecca Davis, the young marketing employee who had apologized at the gala, Along with three other women Vivian recognized from the Sterling Hotel staff, they carried flowers, balloons, and a gift basket filled with baby supplies. "We know you do not need any of this," Rebecca said shyly, "but we wanted to congratulate you in person." Vivian gestured for them to come closer. "This means more than you know," she said. "All of you." One of the older women, a housekeeper who had worked at the hotel for over a decade, stepped forward. "We watched what that woman did to you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For years, we watched her treat people like dirt, and we said nothing because we were afraid. You showed us that standing up is possible. You showed us that bullies do not always win." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry at everything these days, though her doctor assured her it was normal postpartum hormones. "I did not do it alone," she said. "I had help. People who believed in me even when I did not believe in myself." She looked at Charlotte, who nodded silently. "That is what we wanted to tell you," Rebecca said. "You inspired us. 5 of us have filed complaints about harassment we experienced under the old management. 2 others started going back to school. And Margaret," she gestured to the older housekeeper. "She finally left her abusive partner after 15 years. The housekeeper named Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Watching you stand up to someone so powerful made me realize I had power too. I just had to find the courage to use it." Vivian reached out and took her hand. "That courage was always inside you," she said. "Sometimes we just need to see someone else go first." The visit lasted another 20 minutes, filled with laughter and tears and the passing around of baby Eleanor, who slept through all of it with the untroubled peace of someone who had no idea how hard her mother had fought for her existence. After the visitors left, Vivian sat alone with Charlotte and her daughter, watching the afternoon light shift across the hospital walls. "What happens now?" Charlotte asked. "Everything," Vivian replied. "I rebuild. I raise my daughter. I use what I have built to help others. I live." And Preston Eleanor. She considered the question carefully. Preston's trial is scheduled for next month. He is expected to plead guilty to avoid a longer sentence. His first wife has agreed to testify about the bigamy charges, and the original Eleanor sentencing hearing is next week. The prosecutor is recommending 8 to 12 years. Vivian felt no satisfaction at the news. No triumph. Just a quiet relief that justice was being served. However imperfectly, "I thought I would feel happier about it," she admitted. "I thought watching them face consequences would feel like victory." "How does it feel?" "Like closing a chapter. Not the whole book, just one painful chapter that went on too long." Baby Eleanor stirred in her arms, yawning with the full-body commitment that only newborns could manage. Her tiny hands stretched outward, grasping at the air, finding nothing but the warmth of her mother's embrace. Vivian bent down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Welcome to the world, baby girl," she whispered. "Mama has got you. And nobody will ever make you feel like you are not enough." She looked up at Charlotte, who was watching them with an expression of profound tenderness. "Thank you," Vivian said, "for everything, for believing in me when I did not believe in myself, for standing beside me when everyone else walked away." Charlotte smiled through her own tears. That is what family is for. Family. The word had never meant much to Vivian before. Her mother was gone. Her father was distant. Her husband had been a lie. But looking at Charlotte, looking at her daughter, looking at the future stretching out before her like an unwritten story, she understood that family was not about blood or marriage. Family was about the people who stood beside you in the dark and helped you find the light. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the city, Eleanor Lawson was preparing for her sentencing hearing. Somewhere else, Preston was meeting with his lawyers to discuss his guilty plea. But here, in this quiet room, none of that mattered. Here, there was only a mother and her child, beginning a new story together, a story built not on wealth or power or status, but on something far more valuable: love, truth, and the courage to stand up for both. Vivian Mercer went on to become one of the most respected philanthropists in America, founding scholarships for first-generation entrepreneurs and establishing the Mercer Foundation for women escaping abusive situations. She remarried 5 years later, to a kindergarten teacher named Thomas, who had no idea she was wealthy until their third date. He proposed with a ring he had saved for 18 months to afford, Eleanor Lawson was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for assault, fraud, and conspiracy. She serves her time in a minimum security facility. She has never met her granddaughter. Preston Lawson pleaded guilty to bigamy, fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 6 years in order to pay restitution to both his wives. His first wife used the settlement to open a women's shelter in Florida. Little Eleanor Mercer grew up knowing exactly who she was and where she came from. At 18, she gave the commencement speech at her high school graduation. Her topic was the power of second chances. She began by saying, "My mother taught me that your name does not define you. Your choices do."